Did you ever lose faith in your parents, the people you rely on the most? Well, I definitely have. Because of my parents, I was living a lie for so long. They were hiding something that I could never have imagined. I know my story is strange, but I'll explain from the beginning. My name is Cassie, but my dad always calls me Princess Cassandra. My mom passed away a few years ago. She was really sick. Cancer. We cared for her as much as we could, but eventually the illness won and took her from us. Since then, it was just me and Dad. It was sad at first. I remember crying myself to sleep for the longest time. We lived in a small apartment and enjoyed doing simple things together, like watching movies and eating pizza. My dad always came home late and worked so hard, but when he came home, he always gave me a big hug and asked, "How's my princess?" And then, "How's the kingdom?" He always made an effort to be happy around me, smiling and hugging. It felt good when we were together. Sometimes at night, I would still remember Mom and cry. And he would come to my room and tell me it will be okay and that Mom will always be with us in our hearts. My dad was a humble construction worker. He's really good with fixing houses and making them look amazing. If you ask me, he was the best worker in his company. Life back then was nice and simple. One day, a few months after things started getting back to normal, my father met this woman, Stephanie. When he told me about her, he was smiling as if he got some life back into him. He walked taller and dressed way nicer. He started hanging out with Stephanie more and more. I didn't mind, as I was really happy for him that he was finally laughing and happy again. After a short while, he brought her to meet me at a restaurant. She seemed okay, I guess. She wasn't my mom, not by a long shot. But she did make my dad happy. I found her a little airheaded and silly. I couldn't figure out what Dad found in her. But when I looked at him, I saw him smiling outside the house. That was a rare thing. Almost never happened since Mom passed away. I wanted to see him smile for so long. I was okay with it, as long as she was making him smile like that. A few weeks after my dad and Stephanie met, she moved in with us. But it was so obvious that she didn't like our apartment. She would always make these sarcastic remarks. If we only had more space, we wouldn't bump into each other so much. Or comparing us to some of her rich friends, how they had this nice home cinema or a big jacuzzi and we didn't. Not too long after Stephanie moved in with us, my dad told me that we are moving to another house. I was shocked. Moving? How? I knew how the world works. How can we move if we are barely making enough for this place? For example, sometimes when I asked my dad to buy me stuff, he would tell me he wished he could, but we just don't have the money for it right now. It looked like he and Stephanie have already decided, and I didn't have any say in the matter. This was super weird, since until then, we always talked about any major decision and decided together. We would make a list together with pros and cons, and then make a decision. I was so hurt that he didn't even ask my opinion, like, at all. Then we all moved together to this big house. It was huge, with many rooms, marble floors, and those poles inside the house, like a museum. My dad said, "A palace for my princess." And I was so happy. I ran through all the rooms with hands wide open, counting the number of rooms, and my dad was running after me. When I got to room number 12, he caught me with his big bear hug and swung me in the air. That night in my room, I started thinking, and something didn't make much sense. I knew my father was not that rich. I saw houses like this in those reality shows, with all the celebrities and other millionaires. But I was so confused. How can we suddenly afford this kind of house? It's impossible. Everything just looked so expensive. It even came with furniture and a room just for me, with all the dolls in the world. When I asked my dad how it was all possible, he smiled and said he got a big promotion at work. I jumped into his arms and we hugged for the longest time. I was so happy to hear that. I didn't really mind our old life, but this was really amazing. Since we moved to a new area, I had to move to a new school too. I was scared of how the kids will be like. Will they accept me? Will they ignore me? I didn't know anyone. and it looked so massive. They even had swimming pools in the school. Not to mention the 8 tennis courts, baseball, football, and soccer fields, and an absolutely huge gym. I had to make new friends, join new clubs, know all the shortcuts to get to class. Everything was new and all, but after a little while, it got easier. This school was different from my old one. Everyone here was so fancy. With their nice shoes and expensive makeup, it was as if I entered one of those Hollywood shows with all the rich kids. And yes, they gave me a uniform with that skirt and that bow. It was okay, but I felt like everyone was looking and judging everyone all the time. It was weird, and it felt really weird. They never showed that in the movies. The other night, I heard my dad and Stephanie arguing in whispers when they thought I couldn't hear them. Stephanie called my dad cheap and lazy, but that's impossible. He was never any of those things. He gave us this amazing house and everything. We were living like royalty. That winter, my dad took me aside and told me that we had to move again. Again, super weird. We just moved to this big fancy house and now we have to move again? What's wrong with this house? Moving again meant starting over in the new school and oh my God, I finally started having friends again. And all the clubs I joined, the debate team. Oh no, we have a match next week. It felt as if Stephanie was behind this. Dad wouldn't do this to me. This must be why he was acting so strange. And he didn't ask me. Again. I was so angry at her. At him. Why would they do this to me? Why would they rip me from my friends and for the second time? This is unbelievable. And when I told him all of this, he shouted at me for the first time ever. Stop being such a baby. We need to move and that's final. I was shocked stiff. He scared me. He never behaved like this. He used to be just like a monk. Always happy, always calm. What is happening here? We moved to another big house. It was just as big as the first one, but this house had so many gadgets. It was one of those smart houses with remote fireplaces, TVs in the walls or dropping down from the ceiling of every room, and a pool that comes out when you press a button, and the courtyard opens up. But none of this meant anything anymore. I thought it was all useless toys. I was so angry. Once again, I had to go to a new school and get a new uniform. Everyone looked at me as the new girl again, and I had no one. All my friends were at the other school, and they were so busy with their dances and parades that they completely forgot about me. I didn't understand why Dad and Stephanie would put me through this again. Don't they know what it's like? It was horrible. It felt as if I'm being ripped apart from the only good thing I had. I felt so lonely. My dad heard me cry, sat by my side, and said real softly, "Don't worry, everyone loves you. You'll make new good friends again. We had to move because of my work, but I just want the best for you, my princess." "I don't care. I hate it here," I cried even harder. He then brought me that tasty chocolate filled with peanut butter that I'd liked so much and asked, "Who's my princess? Who can do anything?" I smiled and agreed with him. He always knew what to say to make me happy. I hugged him so hard. One night, shortly after we moved to the new mansion, it still felt strange, as if it was someone else's home. I heard my dad and Stephanie arguing. Hearing them argue and fight wasn't unusual, but this time, it was really bad. Stephanie was shouting awful things at my dad, how he'll always be poor, how he's a fraud, and how everyone can see right through him. He in turn called her a witch. She took her suitcase and left the house. He went after her, but quickly returned. What did she even mean? I ran to my room and pretended to be asleep. Their fight ran over and over in my head. Why would she say such awful things? None of them can be true. It didn't make any sense. A few weeks after Stephanie left, something very strange happened. I arrived home from school just like any other day and was surprised to see strange people parking their car and entering our house. People I've never seen before. Oh no, we were getting robbed! I grabbed my phone and was about to call the police, but then I saw my dad in the driveway, with our car packed with all our stuff in it. I had no idea what was going on and ran to him. "There are people in our house!" I screamed. But he acted all casual-like and told me to go sit in the car. I opened the window while he shook the man's hand, and they seemed very happy. The stranger's kids looked happy too and ran into the house. There was a girl, a little younger than me. She had the same doll as the ones in my room. Everyone was acting as if everything is normal, but nothing was normal. Why would these people take our house? Why would my dad be so happy about it? I didn't know what to do. My head was spinning. Eventually, my dad entered the car and we drove away. I wanted to ask him about what had happened, but he said, "Not now, honey, not now." My head was about to explode. I didn't know what to make of it. I remembered the fight my dad and Stephanie had back at the house, where she shouted at him that he was a fraud and a liar. A fraud and a liar. We went to a small motel on the road, not far from the house, and unpacked everything. My dad said to get settled in and went into the shower. When I finally had a moment to myself, I sat on the bed and started crying. Crying so hard, I couldn't stop myself. Was my dad really a fraud? Was he really a liar? What is happening here? None of it made any sense. None of it. My dad came out of the shower and saw me crying. He held me and said he was sorry and that I was not supposed to see that. He said that the business is a little slow now, so we'll stay here for just a little while and wait it out until his next job comes in. He said, "My boss, Richard, you remember Richard, right? He said the next house should be ready in just a few weeks." A few weeks came and went. We were still homeless, and I was so angry at my dad that I couldn't even talk to him anymore. Every day when he called me for dinner, I would take the plate and eat in my room. How could I ever speak to him again? How could I ever trust him again? He's a fraud and a liar. And even worse, he lied to me, his princess, or so he said. Eventually, we moved to a small apartment, but it didn't change anything for me at all. I was still angry at my dad, and we haven't spoken in weeks by then. I went to a public school in the area. Kids were normal there. It was not as fancy, but everyone was nice and welcoming. I joined the club and made new friends. By now, I was kind of an expert at making new friends, and I was telling everyone stories about where I used to live. Everyone loved to hear the stories about the palace with a million rooms. The other day, I came into the kitchen to take something to eat. My dad was working on his laptop and talking on the phone. I overheard him on a call. He was talking on the speaker while working and didn't notice me at all. His boss was pretty much yelling at him. He was so angry. Why is the house not ready yet? Why is he not getting the team to work properly? Why are all the permits not signed? My dad tried to open his mouth to explain, but didn't get a chance to say anything when his boss hung up on him while saying, "You're walking on thin ice here, mister. Really thin ice." My dad sat down quietly for a moment, holding his head with his hands, and I heard him weep. He was crying. My dad was crying. I've never in my life seen him cry. Ever. I came to him and asked, "What's wrong, Dad?" He quickly wiped the tears from his face and said, "It's nothing, honey. It's nothing. Just work." I hugged him and he hugged me back. This is the first time I saw him. I mean, really saw him. And we talked. We really, really talked. Thinking about it now, we haven't had a real talk since Mom died. He told me how sorry he was for the whole thing with Stephanie, how she wanted to impress her rich friends and feel rich, and how she made him live in the houses he was fixing before the owners came back from their summer homes. He asked if I remembered all the brunches we hosted with Stephanie's friends, and told me how she threatened to leave him if he didn't do it. He was so sorry. He said over and over how he felt so lonely and thought he had no choice. I told him I felt lonely too, and that he'll always have me, and we talked for hours. We got pizza and ice cream and sat down in the living room. He promised he'll never do anything again to make me feel lonely. It was so stupid of him to ever think it was okay to do. And for what? It meant nothing, and I agreed. I guess sometimes adults can be irresponsible, but I couldn't stay mad at my dad any longer.
Hi, I'm Ricky, and I have the most obnoxious father of all time. My dad thinks he's the hottest man out there. He just doesn't know that girls are all over him because he's a millionaire. That's all. He brings a new girl every week, never the same girl twice. This week, however, he brought a very ugly woman, Shannon. She was thin like a paperclip, wearing too much makeup, and spoke like a drunk old woman. On our first meeting, she said to me, "Oh, I'm only sorry that you are 20 years younger than me." Ew! Then she and my dad laughed disgustingly. I didn't know why my father would date a woman like that. I mean, I'm used to him picking hot blonde 20-year-olds, like Shannon's daughter, Jessie. Jessie was so hot. She had the most gorgeous body and the most beautiful blue eyes you could ever see. I couldn't get my eyes off her. The four of us had dinner at an expensive restaurant. Dad said, "We should let the kids meet before we go over anything serious." What? I hope that Dad is not planning to marry Shannon. I want to date Jessie so bad. If she becomes my stepsister, then it would be awkward and somewhat nasty. I couldn't ask him over dinner because I didn't want to embarrass them. But when the women went to the restroom, I leaned over and asked, "Hey, Dad, are you really going to marry Shannon?" And he responded, "Oh, hell no. I'm marrying her daughter, Jessie." My heart stopped. I screamed, "What? That girl is my age. You are 30 years older than her." And he said, "Oh, what do you know? It's my life. Plus, she likes me too. A lot." I felt sick to my stomach, and I felt disgusted with Jessie. Why would she do that to herself, marrying a thirsty old man like my obnoxious father? But when the women came back to the table, I noticed that Jessie was not herself. It was obvious that she had been crying. I also paid attention that her mom wasn't allowing her to speak. She finished all her sentences. When Dad asked Jessie, "So, where do you prefer the wedding to be?" Jessie was about to open her mouth to answer, but her mom immediately interrupted and said, "At the Four Seasons Hotel, of course." Jessie looked pissed, but she kept quiet, and I began to understand the whole thing. They are forcing her into marriage. I felt really bad for her. The next day, Jessie was at our place. She wanted to meet with the wedding planner to discuss wedding details. When they finished, I came into the room and asked her, "Why are you doing this?" She was quiet for a few moments and then said, $2 million. I gasped. $2 million? What do you mean? She explained, "My mom is making me do it. She's in debt and desperately needs the money to start over. Your dad is paying me $2 million to marry him for a few years." That sick, sick man. Then, unexpectedly, Jessie turned to me, kissed me passionately and said, "But I like you though. I want you. Can we do something about it?" I liked her too, so I kissed her again. When we finished, I said, "You know, we could run away." Her eyes lit up. "But we need money. I don't think we both have enough." I told her that I had a plan. "You should convince my dad to give you half the money before the wedding. That's the only way we could get away." Then she came closer and kissed me again and said that she'll think about it. I was more determined to find a solution and run away. At night, I went to my dad's office to steal his money. I wasn't going to let him marry Jessie. I stole $20,000 from his safe and sent a message to Jessie asking her to meet me at the airport. We were very excited to get on the plane. We rented a small, cozy apartment to spend our time. When Jessie entered the bedroom, I had a bed full of red roses with candles waiting for her. She looked surprised, and before she said a word, I grabbed her and kissed her. By that point, I've been dying for this moment to happen. Jessie kissed me back and told me that she loved me. We took things to bed, and I guess you can figure out what happened after. Life was pretty sweet, until one day I went out to buy some food, and when I got back, I didn't find Jessie. I called her and sent her messages on her phone, but she wasn't there. Where did she go? When I sat on the bed, I noticed there was a piece of paper there. It said, "Thank you for getting me out of there, but we are not meant for each other." I blanked for a few moments. She must be joking. I checked my bag, and she left me with $1,000. What? I got tricked by a witch. I sat on my bed thinking of what to do. $1,000 are not enough to cover my expenses, and I knew I could not go back to Dad. He would have probably figured out by now that I ran away with Jessie. I mean, we did disappear at the same time. I spent 2 days thinking about my situation when I noticed a wealthy lady entering the restaurant where I was having my lunch. And it hit me. Why can't I be a gold digger? I mean, girls do it all the time. And without any hesitation, I sought that woman. Her name was Janet, and she was 50 years old. I followed her for a week to know where she spends most of her time, and I started hitting on her. Then one time, when she was having coffee in the park, I sat next to her and said, "What a lucky cup of coffee." And she blushed, just like little girls. We started talking, and soon I was in bed at her house. We dated for a while before she asked, "Can you come and live with me?" "I'd be happy to," I said. So I ended up moving with her. She spent her money on me. She bought me all the things I need, including a brand new Mercedes. But then, 3 months later, Janet came to me and said, "I need you to come with me to a wedding." "Sure, babe," I said. anything for you. And we went there. And oh my God, it was my dad's wedding to Jessie. How is that? I came close and Dad said, "Hey son, where have you been? I tried calling you several times. I thought you were on a trip or something." So Dad doesn't know anything about it? And then I looked at Jessie and said, "Hi, I hope you're happy about marrying my dad." She didn't say anything, but Dad responded, "Yeah, she is. And congratulations, you are going to become a big brother." Pregnant? She must be kidding. I couldn't believe her lies. She's been planning this all along. She wanted me out of the house so she could get the wealth all to herself and her new boy. I was furious. She manipulated both of us. I couldn't let that go by, so I decided to get revenge. During the party, I raised my glass and said, "Can I have your attention, please?" Everyone looked at me, including Jessie, who was really nervous. I said, "You know, Dad and I have the same taste. We even dated the same woman. She ran away with me for a week before she came back to marry him." Silence filled the room. Guests looked shocked. Jessie left the room. Dad looked angry and disappointed. I ruined the wedding for the second time, but I was proud of it. As bad as my dad was, he doesn't deserve to be fooled. This time, however, I was completely alone. I had to live on my own. Dad kicked me out of the house, and I had practically nothing, and Janet refused to take me back. I got a job and lived in a small apartment for 2 years before I heard the terrible news from my dad's lawyer. "Your dad passed away." Tears started falling from my eyes. I hadn't had the chance to make amends with him. But then the lawyer continued, "He left you all his money." I went back to our house and took over his company. In a few years, I became a very successful businessman. I got married to a beautiful woman and had 3 beautiful children. Life was going okay. But then, 20 years later, I was interviewing new employees for the company, and a handsome man called William showed up. After we finished the interview, I asked him, "You look familiar. Do I know you from somewhere?" He smiled and said, "I don't think so, sir, but you may know my mother. She's a successful businesswoman too." "What's her name?" I asked. "Jessie Smith," he responded. Then he said, "Thanks for having me. I'll be happy to hear from you." Jessie, did she get married? Wait, was she really pregnant at that time? Did I just meet my brother? I looked up her picture on Google, and yes, it was her. I had to know the truth, so I decided to meet her. I looked her up on the internet and went to her company. I told the secretary that I wanted to meet her, but without mentioning my real name. I went to her office, and when she saw me, she gasped and said, "What are you doing here?" "I just want to know the truth," I said. "Is William my brother?" She stared at me for a few moments and said, "Actually, he's your son." "You are lying," I screamed. And she responded coldly, "No, I'm not. I found out I was pregnant the same week we ran away. I hadn't had any relationships with your father." "Then why did you go back to marry him?" I asked. She sighed and said, "I didn't want the baby to have the life I lived. You didn't have enough money. I thought your dad was a better provider than you. He could buy me and the baby everything." I sat on the chair. I needed a moment to take that all in. "Does William know about this?" I asked in a shaking voice. She freaked out and said, "No, he doesn't. He thinks that his father is my husband who died 2 years ago. Don't you dare mention that to him." "Are you crazy? You couldn't think of a better lie?" I yelled. "No, and I prefer keeping things the way they are," she yelled back. I got out of the office and called William and told him, "Hey, I hired you for the job. And here we are. My son is working for me. Every day I see him, but I don't have the courage to tell him I'm his father."